In the desolate mountains of Colorado Territory, where the promise of gold had drawn thousands of desperate men to scratch at the Earth's surface in search of fortune, there stood in the year 1870 a mine that had been abandoned for reasons that the local mining company preferred not to discuss in detail. The Black Rock Mining Consortium had purchased the rights to what was known as the Perdition Shaft in 1867, drawn by geological surveys that suggested substantial silver deposits in the deeper reaches of the mountain. But within 18 months, all operations had ceased, the equipment had been removed, and official records indicated only that the mine had been temporarily suspended due to unforeseen complications. The true nature of these complications was known only to a handful of company executives, and the foreman who had supervised the original excavation, men who had signed agreements that bound them to silence about what had been discovered in the depths beneath Perdition Mountain. But secrets have a way of spreading in mining communities, and by 1870, rumors circulated throughout the territory about strange occurrences that had led to the mine's closure. Stories of sounds that seemed to come from the earth itself, of equipment that malfunctioned in impossible ways, and of miners who had emerged from the deepest shafts forever changed by what they had encountered in the darkness below. It was these very rumors that attracted the attention of Josiah Crane and his crew of independent miners, men who had spent their lives following played-out claims and abandoned workings in search of the overlooked fortunes that larger operations had missed. Crane was a veteran of the California goldfields who possessed both the experience to recognize promising geological formations and the stubborn determination to pursue opportunities that more cautious men would avoid. His crew consisted of 7 other miners, each one a specialist in his own right, bound together by shared poverty and the conviction that their next dig would be the one that finally delivered the wealth that had eluded them throughout their careers. The decision to reopen the Perdition Shaft was made during the harsh winter of 1870, when legitimate mining opportunities were scarce, and the crew faced the choice between risking their lives on an abandoned claim or spending another season in poverty waiting for spring to bring new prospects. Crane's research into the mine's history had convinced him that the Black Rock Consortium had abandoned a potentially lucrative operation due to superstition and corporate timidity rather than genuine geological obstacles. The original mining records, which Crane had obtained through contacts in the Territorial Land Office, indicated that the deepest shafts had been reaching profitable ore grades just before operations ceased. The sudden termination of excavation, despite these promising results, suggested to Crane that fear, rather than economics, had driven the company's decision, creating an opportunity for men who possessed the courage to continue where others had retreated. The crew that assembled at the Perdition Shaft in February 1870 brought with them not just mining equipment, but also a skeptical pragmatism that would prove insufficient preparation for what they would encounter in the depths below. Samuel Porter, the crew's engineer, had designed new supports and ventilation systems that would allow them to excavate safely at depths that the previous operation had apparently found problematic. Thomas Mackenzie, their explosives expert, carried sufficient powder and fuse to blast through any geological obstacles that might have discouraged earlier miners. But perhaps most importantly, the crew included Marcus Webb, a learned man who served as their surveyor and record keeper, documenting their progress in detailed journals that would later provide the only reliable account of what transpired during their final weeks at the mine. Webb's education and analytical mind made him uniquely qualified to observe and record phenomena that less literate miners might have dismissed as imagination or superstition. The early weeks of their operation proceeded according to plan, with the crew making steady progress in clearing debris from the abandoned shafts and establishing their own excavation routines. The mine showed every sign of having been hastily abandoned, with equipment and materials left behind, in ways that suggested the previous operators had departed with unusual urgency. But rather than viewing this as a warning, Crane's crew interpreted it as confirmation that their predecessors had been driven away by fear rather than genuine danger. Webb's journals from this period document a gradually developing unease among the crew as they encountered evidence that the previous mining operation had been disturbed by phenomena that conventional explanation could not address. Tools were found in locations where they should not have been placed, arranged in patterns that suggested purposeful organization by hands, other than those of the miners who had used them. Excavation marks on the tunnel walls showed characteristics that indicated digging had been conducted with implements that bore no resemblance to standard mining equipment. More disturbing were the acoustic phenomena that the crew began to experience as they penetrated deeper into the mountain than the previous operation had reached. The sounds that echoed through the tunnels seemed to originate from sources far below their current excavation level, suggesting the presence of open spaces or active processes at depths that geological surveys indicated should be solid rock. These sounds followed patterns that implied intelligence and purpose rather than random geological activity. The noises from below have taken on characteristics that suggest communication rather than mere physical disturbance, Webb wrote in his journal entry for March 15, 1870. Porter insists they are caused by settling rock or underground water flow, but the rhythm and variation in tone suggests something far more complex. Mackenzie claims to hear responses to our blasting, as if something beneath us is answering our explosions with signals of its own. The discovery that would ultimately doom Crane's crew came in late March, when their deepest excavation broke through into a natural cavern system that the geological surveys had failed to detect. The void that opened beneath their tunnel was far larger than anything that should have existed at that depth, extending beyond the reach of their lanterns and filled with air that carried scents and sounds that belonged to no underground environment that any of them had previously encountered. Webb's description of their first exploration of this subterranean space reveals men who were simultaneously excited by the prospect of discovering valuable mineral deposits and disturbed by the evidence that they had uncovered something that challenged their understanding of the mountain's geological structure. The cavern was not empty, but contained formations that seemed to have been shaped by processes that differed fundamentally from normal cave development. The chambers we have discovered extend far beyond what our instruments can measure, Webb recorded. The walls bear markings that suggest artificial modification, though by what agency and for what purpose I cannot determine. Most unsettling are the passages that lead deeper into the mountain, openings that emit sounds and odors that Porter describes as resembling those of large-scale industrial activity, though no such operations exist in this region. The crew's decision to continue excavation, despite these discoveries, was motivated by the discovery of mineral veins that exceeded their most optimistic projections. The deeper chambers contained silver and other precious metals in concentrations that suggested enormous potential wealth, deposits that seemed to increase in richness the further they penetrated into the cavern system. But their pursuit of these riches required them to venture ever deeper into spaces that showed increasing evidence of modification by intelligences that possessed capabilities far beyond anything that human technology could achieve. As we delve into this terrifying tale of greed overcoming prudence, we must confront the possibility that the earth beneath our feet may harbor secrets that human understanding was never meant to uncover. The story we're exploring forces us to question whether some boundaries should never be crossed, and what prices we might pay for disturbing forces that have slumbered in darkness since before human civilization began. If you find yourself drawn to these investigations, into the dangers of probing too deeply into mysteries that should remain buried, please share your thoughts in the comments below and join our community by subscribing to the channel. The transformation in the crew's behavior became apparent as they spent more time in the deeper chambers, with each man exhibiting changes in personality and judgment that their companions initially attributed to the stress of working in an unprecedented environment. But Webb's detailed observations revealed patterns of alteration that suggested exposure to influences that went beyond simple psychological pressure. Samuel Porter, whose engineering expertise had enabled their excavation to proceed safely, began to report structural anomalies that his measurements could not verify. He spoke of passages that seemed to change dimensions between visits, of support beams that showed stress patterns inconsistent with the loads they were designed to bear, and of ventilation currents that flowed in directions that violated basic principles of underground air movement. Thomas Mackenzie's behavior became even more disturbing as he developed an obsession with the sounds that emerged from the deepest passages, spending hours listening to what he claimed were communications from sources far below their current excavation level. His expertise in explosives led him to propose blasting operations that would open direct passages to these sound sources, despite the obvious dangers that such work would create for the structural integrity of their excavation. But it was Marcus Webb himself who documented the most detailed account of the phenomena that were affecting all members of the crew, recording experiences that challenged his educated understanding of reality while maintaining the analytical perspective that made his observations valuable despite their incredible content. His journal entries from April 1870 describe encounters with entities that seemed to inhabit the deeper chambers, beings whose existence challenged every assumption about what forms of life might survive in environments far removed from surface conditions. "We are no longer alone in these depths," Webb wrote on April 10th. "The chambers echo with movements that are too coordinated to be natural phenomena and too intelligent to be attributed to ordinary subterranean creatures. Porter insists they are bats or other cave-dwelling animals, but the sounds we hear suggest organization and purpose that no known species could achieve." The journal goes on to describe direct encounters with entities that Webb struggled to characterize through conventional language, beings that seemed to exist at the intersection between physical reality and something that his Victorian scientific worldview could not accommodate. These creatures appeared to be aware of the miners' presence and showed interest in their activities that went beyond simple territorial behavior. "The inhabitants of these depths have begun to approach our work areas during the night hours when the crew is absent," Webb recorded. "We find evidence of their presence in the form of tools that have been moved and arranged in patterns that suggest examination and analysis. More disturbing are the modifications they have made to our excavation, extending our tunnels according to principles that no human engineer could devise." The crew's discovery that their mining operation was being modified by external agencies created a crisis that divided them between those who wanted to abandon the mine immediately and those who were determined to continue despite the obvious dangers. Crane himself was torn between his responsibility for his men's safety and his conviction that they were on the verge of uncovering wealth that would compensate for all the risks they had accepted. The decision to continue was ultimately made when Mackenzie reported that the entities had begun to communicate with him directly, providing information about the location of mineral deposits that proved to be completely accurate when verified through excavation. This apparent cooperation between the miners and the subterranean inhabitants created a false sense of security that masked the true nature of the relationship that was developing. Webb's analysis of this communication revealed that the entities were not simply providing mining guidance, but were systematically gathering information about surface conditions and human capabilities through their interactions with the crew. The questions they posed and the responses they seemed to expect suggested intelligence that was both ancient and sophisticated, combined with knowledge of the upper world that should not have been possible for creatures that had presumably spent eons in underground isolation. They speak of the surface world with familiarity that suggests recent observation rather than distant memory, Webb noted in his increasingly frantic journal entries. Their questions about our tools, our methods, and our society reveal understanding that could only come from direct study of human civilization. "I fear we have established contact with intelligences that have been monitoring our species far longer than we have suspected their existence." The final phase of the excavation began when the entities offered to guide the miners to the richest mineral deposits in exchange for assistance with what they described as preparation for return. The nature of this preparation was never fully explained, but it involved modifications to the mine's tunnel system that would create direct passages between the deepest chambers and the surface, openings that the entities claimed were necessary for activities that would benefit both species. Crane's agreement to these modifications was motivated by greed that had been intensified by weeks of exposure to influences that had corrupted his judgment and moral reasoning. The promise of unlimited wealth had overcome his concern for his crew's safety, while the apparent cooperation of the subterranean entities had convinced him that their agenda aligned with his own objectives. But Webb's journals reveal growing awareness that the modifications being made to the mine served purposes that had nothing to do with mining efficiency and everything to do with providing the entities with access to the surface world that they had been denied for unknown periods of time. The passages being created were too large for simple ore transport and too sophisticated for conventional excavation, suggesting that they were designed to accommodate traffic that would flow upward rather than downward. The crew's final weeks were marked by an acceleration of the psychological changes that had been affecting all members, with men who had been rational and experienced miners displaying behavior that suggested fundamental alterations to their personality and cognitive function. They worked with inhuman endurance on projects that served no apparent mining purpose, following instructions from entities whose motivations they no longer questioned or attempted to understand. Webb's last coherent journal entries describe a mining operation that had become something entirely different. A construction project designed to facilitate the emergence of beings whose intentions toward the surface world remained unknown, but whose capabilities far exceeded anything that human resistance could hope to contain. The miners had become unwilling agents of forces that had been waiting in the Earth's depths for opportunities to expand their influence beyond the subterranean realm that had contained them. The discovery of the crew's fate came in May 1870, when concerned relatives hired a search party to investigate their prolonged absence from the nearby settlement where they had been purchasing supplies. What the searchers found at the Perdition Shaft challenged their understanding of mining accidents and raised questions that territorial authorities were reluctant to pursue too deeply. The mine showed evidence of excavation on a scale that far exceeded what 8 men could have accomplished in the time they had been working, with tunnels and chambers that extended deep into the mountain according to plans that seemed to serve purposes other than mineral extraction. The sophistication of the engineering involved suggested knowledge and capabilities that the missing miners could not have possessed. Most disturbing was the complete absence of the crew themselves, despite evidence that they had been present at the mine until very recently. Personal effects were found arranged in ways that suggested sudden departure rather than gradual abandonment, while the mining equipment showed signs of use that indicated work had continued until the very day of the search party's arrival. The only trace of Marcus Webb was his journal, found in the deepest accessible chamber, along with notes that documented the final phase of whatever project the crew had been completing. These last entries revealed a man whose scientific rationality had been completely overwhelmed by exposure to phenomena that his educated mind could not process or accept. "We have opened passages that should never have been opened," Webb wrote in his final entry. "The entities that guided our work have revealed their true purpose, and we have become instruments of our own species' potential destruction. They spoke of return, but we understood too late that they meant return to a world that was once theirs, and which they believe should be theirs again." The territorial government's response to the search party's discoveries was to seal the mine permanently and classify all documentation related to the incident. The official explanation for the miners' disappearance was cave-in and equipment failure, though investigators who examined the site found no evidence to support this conclusion and considerable evidence that suggested the mine had been abandoned for reasons that transcended normal industrial accidents. The sealing of Perdition Shaft was accomplished through procedures that seemed designed to prevent something from emerging rather than simply to close an unsafe excavation. Concrete was poured to depths that exceeded any reasonable safety requirement, while the surface installations were destroyed and the area was declared permanently off-limits to civilian access. But the precautions taken by territorial authorities proved insufficient to contain whatever the miners had released during their final weeks of excavation. Reports began to emerge from throughout the region of phenomena that suggested the entities encountered in the Perdition Shaft had found alternative routes to the surface, while geological surveys detected new excavation activity in areas that should have been inaccessible to human mining operations. Dr. William Morrison, a geologist who conducted covert research into the incident during the 1880s, documented evidence that suggested the mining operation had been used by subterranean entities to establish communication networks with similar groups throughout the Western Territories. His findings indicated that the Colorado incident was not isolated, but part of a coordinated effort by underground civilizations to re-establish contact with the surface world. As our investigation reveals the terrifying consequences of disturbing forces that had slumbered in the Earth's depths, we must ask ourselves what other ancient powers might be awakening as human civilization expands into territories that were once forbidden. If these revelations about the dangers of digging too deep compel you to reflect on the wisdom of leaving some mysteries buried, please consider leaving a like and subscribing for more explorations into the terrible prices of unchecking human curiosity. The long-term consequences of the Perdition Shaft incident influenced mining policy throughout the Western Territories, though the true reasons for new safety regulations and depth restrictions were never publicly acknowledged. Federal authorities established monitoring programs designed to detect unusual excavation activity and created response protocols for incidents involving contact with unknown subterranean entities. The academic study of the case was conducted under classification levels that prevented public access to the most significant findings, though declassified documents released decades later revealed that government researchers had identified similar incidents at mining sites throughout North America and Europe. The pattern suggested that human excavation activities were increasingly likely to encounter civilizations that had developed in underground environments during the millennia when the surface world was supposedly uninhabited by intelligent life. Modern geological surveys using advanced technology have detected extensive tunnel networks beneath the Rocky Mountains that appear to be artificial in origin and far older than any known human civilization. These discoveries have raised questions about the true history of North American settlement and the possibility that indigenous peoples may have shared the continent with other intelligent species that remained hidden from European colonization. The site of the original Perdition Shaft remains under federal control, though satellite imagery suggests ongoing excavation activity in the area that cannot be attributed to authorized government projects. Local residents continue to report unusual phenomena associated with the sealed mine, including sounds that seem to come from deep underground and lights that appear in locations where no human activity should be possible. The psychological impact of the incident on the families of the missing miners created a legacy of fear and suspicion that influenced mining communities throughout Colorado for generations. Stories about the dangers of digging too deep became part of local folklore, serving as warnings that were often dismissed as superstition by outsiders, but which reflected genuine knowledge about risks that official authorities preferred not to acknowledge. The modern mining industry has developed technologies that enable excavation at depths that would have been impossible in 1870, raising questions about whether contemporary operations might encounter the same entities that destroyed Crane's crew. Environmental monitoring equipment at deep mining sites occasionally detects anomalies that suggest the presence of large-scale construction activity at depths where no such work should be occurring. The international implications of the Perdition Shaft case became apparent when similar incidents were reported from mining operations around the world, suggesting that the entities encountered in Colorado were part of a global underground civilization whose activities were becoming increasingly apparent as human excavation reached unprecedented depths. Intelligence agencies began sharing information about unexplained mining incidents and developing response protocols for encounters with non-human underground entities. The horrible story of the miners who dug too deep serves as a warning about the dangers that may lurk beneath the Earth's surface and the wisdom of respecting boundaries that have been established by forces far older and more powerful than human civilization. Josiah Crane and his crew paid the ultimate price for their determination to pursue wealth, regardless of the warnings they received, becoming victims of their own greed and curiosity. Their fate reminds us that some mysteries are meant to remain buried, and that the earth beneath our feet may harbor secrets that challenge our understanding of natural history and our place in the world. The entities that the miners awakened may still be active in the depths below, pursuing agendas that were interrupted but not abandoned when human interference forced them to adapt their plans. The legacy of Perdition Shaft lives on in the recognition that human ambition and technological capability may have outpaced our wisdom about the consequences of disturbing forces that have remained hidden since before recorded history began. The miners who ignored the warnings about digging too deep discovered that some boundaries exist for reasons that transcend human understanding, and that crossing them may unleash consequences that extend far beyond the immediate participants in such folly. In the end, perhaps the most terrifying aspect of their story is not what they found in the depths below, but the possibility that their excavation was successful in ways they never intended, providing pathways for ancient intelligences to return to a world that may not be prepared for their emergence. The Earth still holds its secrets, but human activity may be creating opportunities for those secrets to escape their underground prisons and reclaim domains that they once ruled before humanity learned to fear the dark places beneath the ground. The horrible story of what the miners woke up may be far from over, and the consequences of their fatal curiosity may continue to unfold in ways that their descendants are only beginning to understand. The warning echoes from the depths of Perdition Shaft remind us that some doors should never be opened, and that the price of knowledge about certain mysteries may be higher than any treasure that such knowledge might reveal.